impact on the larger picture?
I feel overwhelmed all the time, but I have learned that I'd rather feel overwhelmed than underwhelmed, right? That overwhelm is a lot of things, but usually people who are deeply passionate about what they're doing have a feeling of overwhelm, right? I have been someone who, numbed out forever and wasn't doing my best when I was an addict, and that is not a good feeling either. I would like to be whelmed.
Me too. That sounds like just even keel. Whelmed.
What happened to whelmed? Like, we can't, it's impossible to find the whelmed, right? But I mean, what I think the most beautiful life is, my little opinion, based on the people I've observed and my own experience of life, it seems to be this journey or path where you're constantly going towards what breaks your heart, right? You're not ignoring it. You're kind of like the Joan of Arcing your life. You're like, what's the most overwhelming, heartbreaking, unhandleable problem? That.
Run to that.
Run to that. And most people don't do that. The people who are here are doing that. And that is why they're overwhelmed, right? So the only problem with overwhelm is that kind of overwhelm, I mean, we all need boundaries, we all need all of that, but that kind of overwhelm that comes with doing actually world-changing work, the only problem is if you think it's solvable, if you think it's a problem. But if you think that kind of engagement in the world, that being that kind of Joan of Arc-like person comes up with a cost, which is this like ache. If you just understand that ache is the honor of being somebody who pays attention and who runs toward instead of away, that ache is kind of the meeting house of the brave, right? And that everyone on this call knows well what I'm talking about. I could be on a different call and they would think I was speaking a different language.
Well, welcome to BBCom, where we talk about this stuff. And I love that. You're right. Running towards what is so important and what you know is going to ache your heart and tug at your heartstrings. And it kind of leads a bit into, you talk so much about the importance of showing up for ourselves, which that's crucial. If we're going to do the hard things and we're going to run towards it, we need to show up for ourselves. And it doesn't just end there. So many in this audience, in their professional lives, personal lives, we want to know, how can we be advocates for each other? So making sure that all of our colleagues, all of those that we interact with, are respected, heard, and encouraged. So help us understand a bit about that, and what are some pieces of advice that we can take into our work and our professional lives?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because we are at this place where we're asking everybody to bring their full self. Bring your full self to the table. Bring your full self to work. And that sounds good, but what happens when people actually do trust an organization or a table or a group enough to offer the gift of their full selves? It usually makes everybody uncomfortable because most tables have only been, the unwritten rule is that only a certain type of person gets to bring their full self. So when other people start bringing it, it often sounds like, that made me feel a certain way, or like what you just said. When people share that self, that's a gift. That means they've trusted that table enough to challenge it, to be vulnerable. And what I see happening right now is that step is being taken by some brave people in rooms. Marginalized people are always the ones who have to be brave and bring themselves to the table. Everybody else has been bringing themselves for millennia, right? But like people of color, women, queer people, disabled people, those sorts of people who haven't been allowed to be their full selves, they're taking a step, but then this really interesting thing is happening, that after they do, there's no net to catch them. The net, this happened recently to my wife and I. She said a thing on a call, And we had to like prepare for the thing. You know, when you have to say this, the hard, tricky thing, and you have to like get all your
rehearse it, get yourself ready,
get your people ready for what you're going to say, you know, do your breathing exercises, have your Celsius, whatever it is that's going to like, yeah. It was many, many men on this call, a few women, and she was bringing up an inequity that was so obvious and so important. And what happened was she said the thing and not a single man stood into the gap. They just let her hang there, right? And it was devastating to her. Then this interesting thing happened, Tiffany, that I think any person who has been in the situation will understand and resonate with, which is she started to get private texts from people who were on that public call, from men, saying things like, oh, that was so brave. Oh, I agree with you completely. Oh, I got your back. And Abby's response was, do you have my back? Because you were silent in the call. And so one thing that I think we can focus on as people with any privilege is the reminder that there is no such thing as silent solidarity. See, those men didn't speak up in the meeting because in the meeting there was a risk to them. If they spoke up, it would put at risk their allegiance in the old boys club, right? So they did it privately, but that's not solidarity. There is no solidarity without risk. So one thing we can do is we can be the one that brings our full self to the table. Or if we are not that, we can be the net that catches the one that in the moment when there is risk to us. That's what solidarity looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great example. If you're not the one that's being bold and having to bring yourself off, you know, with that authenticity, looking for opportunities to echo or to champion a voice, or even provide that opportunity for someone to have a voice if they don't see an in, which I love. So, you know, great example and a message to everyone to, you may be on one side, you may be on the other, and certain days that may flip. So you may be playing both roles.
That's right.
Which kind of leads into a huge theme in your work is around authenticity and living your truth. And this was a main message in your book, Untamed, where you shared how after you met your wife, Abby, your PR team thought you should not come out publicly because they thought it would kill your career. You did not take their advice. And you've said that it's because you're determined to be who you are. Now, I think some people may look at you and feel like it's easier for someone like you, knowing how bold you are, how confident you are. So they may say, gosh, that seems like it might have been easier for her because you seem quite outgoing. And it, again, often it looks easier when someone else does something than maybe when we do it ourselves. What's your advice for someone who's listening, who struggles with confidence, with finding their own voice to be true to themselves, whatever that may be?
Well, I mean, in some ways it was easier for me than the average bear because when I fell in love with Abby, I was married to a man. There was a lot broken in that marriage. But I had enough financial security to make bold decisions. I'm a white woman who had there are real scenarios. I had an education that it was afforded to me because both of my parents were high school teachers, and so they were able to pay for me. You know, there's a lot of, in my book, I said, I had this quote that everybody keeps pulling and posting, and it says, the braver we are, the luckier we get, which is true, but now I also see the reverse is also true, that the luckier we are, the braver we get, right? So there are some reasons why it was easier for me. What I would say is when we talk about confidence, the buzzword usually means like being loud and brave and bold and doing the thing. But what confidence actually means is with fidelity. Right? With fidelity. It actually just means with fidelity to self, whoever that self is. I have 2 daughters, and one of them is wild at heart. Okay, like, wow.
Wait, you have one of those too? I've got one of those.
I have one of those. And so her truth is saying the thing and doing the thing, you know, she is that person. But my other one is an observer, and she's quiet and she listens, and if she's living with fidelity to self, that is her untamed self, right? It has nothing to do with some like type we've made up that is in reaction to patriarchy, right? So like now the brave girl has to be the loudest in the room. As a matter of fact, what we are finding over and over again, what people who are really paying attention, is what we've defined as leadership before is not it. It's not the loudest person in the room. It's not the one who talks over. It's not the one who demands. It's the curator of conversation. It's those who sit at a table and listen and can bring forth people, who cultivate, who curate, who are the best leaders. Somebody told us in 8th grade that like the loudest one is the leader, so we keep pointing at that one and inviting them to be the boss. No! Time to rethink. So what I always say is what confidence has to do is not necessarily recreating some fake idea of what our culture has told us a boss lady or whatever looks like. It's returning to what untamed means, is that wild, inherent, what we were born to be, where we feel most authentic, right? Where we are living in integrity, which means our insides and our outsides are integrated, right? The way that I feel and the way that what I imagine and what I intuit on the inside is what I'm presenting to the world on the outside. I'm not creating a representative self all the time.
Yeah, that's really powerful, because I think that's a message that will resonate with a lot of folks, because you feel like you have to be a certain way, you have to look a certain way, you have to have a certain persona, and authenticity is bringing who you are and that greatness, but not feeling like you have to fit a mold to look a certain way or act a certain way. And I'd love to hear your take on, on this topic of authenticity and bringing your true self. How do you think that impacts the organizations that we're a part of when we have the courage to show up for ourselves?
I think it impacts, okay, short term, long term. I think in the short term, it freaks everybody out, because everybody is saying, we want your authentic self. We want but what authentic selves often present is dissent. Right? Like if there's a bunch of people sitting around a table, if people are bringing their authentic self, then what that looks like is creativity. And creativity is uncomfortable and awkward. And it's people saying like, actually, what did you mean by that? I'm not understanding what you're saying. It's somebody saying, that actually feels like, that makes me feel bad, what you just said. Can we get into that? It's if people are actually saying on the outside, with respect, what they're thinking on the inside, our organizations would blow up in a beautiful way. Like, and as a matter of fact, the only organizations who survive will be the organizations who begin to not only tolerate, but celebrate dissent. Because what we see over and over again is, if the person that if your diversity at your table does not feel empowered and doesn't have a net to say the thing now, you better believe you're gonna hear it later. You're gonna hear it later. It's gonna blow up when the people who you turn over whatever that product was, whatever that program was, to the world, and the world is not afraid. The world's not at your table. The world's not afraid to say, that leaves us out, that makes us feel this certain way. Don't you wish you would have created a culture where the people at the table could have said that and been held? So I think what it looks like is awkwardness and discomfort, and because in the kind of culture we have, our perfectionist culture that's largely based in patriarchy and white supremacy, right? Which is like the false piece at a table. If we don't start to let go of that false piece and let differing voices and dissent come in and make things awkward and celebrate the awkwardness that comes with creativity, we won't make it. So that's what it looks like. It looks like discomfort, it looks like awkwardness, and it looks like leaders who are wise enough and brave enough to be like, ooh, this is the good stuff. Let's stay here for a little while.
Let's let that in. Yeah, let's be uncomfortable for a bit while we work through it. Yeah,
there's no construction without destruction. There's no creation without a little bit of crumbling. And so the smart ones are like, ooh, the crumbling is happening. Yay. That means we're getting something new. And the scared ones are like, shut it down.
Yeah, that's a message that probably resonates with a lot of folks. as they think through, working through change, and just the last couple of years when we think about the different ways we work together and collaborate. And so really appreciate your perspective there, because it's, staying true to yourself, but then also how do you operate within the larger organization to drive change and progress, and how that's going to look different. And you actually, so you have founded a nonprofit called Together Rising, as we mentioned before. And you're the nonprofit helping women, families, children in crisis. And to put you on maybe the spot with one specific lesson, is there one specific lesson that stands out? I know we could probably be here all day, that stands out that you learned over the past 10 years as this organization has grown?
Okay, two things. One like macro and then one micro. Macro, I was spinning, trying to meet needs, domestic, globally. My sister and I, the board and I, everybody just like, it was constant, as everyone on this call will know, the needs don't end. And so it's relentless, whatever part of this work you're in. And I just remember feeling like I was missing something and going to bed each night thinking, okay, there's a lot of suffering, but why? Like, we were reading the stories, these people are doing everything that they were supposed to do. Why is there so much suffering, right? And then one day I read this quote from Desmond Tutu that said, you can only pull people out of the river for so long until you have to look upriver to find out who's pushing them in. And it took a few weeks for that to settle in. And then what that did was shift my entire approach to my work, which is that wherever there's great suffering, there is also great profit upriver. That wherever a group of people are relentlessly suffering, there are profiteers. And that my job is not just to pull people out of the river, although that is a very important part of my job. But my job is to look upstream and find out who is continuously pointing them in, and to challenge that. Because what I have found as a person involved in nonprofit work is that if you don't do that, if you don't add that part, which is tricky, by the way, because I can't talk about that while I'm over here. Like, everyone knows you got your nonprofit hat on, you got to take that on, activist hat. It's very confusing.
Yeah, lots of hats.
Always getting in trouble. But it's almost like the danger is that you become complicit with the forces that you were so passionate about that you started to Joan of Arc your life. Because if you're over here just pulling people out, it's almost like you're the partner of power. They're like, great, we'll keep pushing them in, you keep pulling them out, and nobody's bothering us up here, right? So that is one of the biggest lessons for me, is that for me, I cannot be only a philanthropist. I have to be an activist in order to not be complicit. And then the second, for me personally, which I haven't figured out, is I was hiking with my kid the other day, and I kept struggling because I still can't figure this out with hiking. He had me up in this mountain, and I couldn't figure out, am I supposed to look right in front of me so I don't fall? Or am I supposed to like look up and enjoy the view? Because I can't do both. So either I'm just staring at the ground so I don't die, which is not, I imagine this is not what hiking is about. So, or I look at the beautiful mountains and I trip and fall. For some reason, this reminds me so much of nonprofit work that I can't even.
That's a great analogy.
And I just feel like I probably don't even have to explain it for this crew. But it's like, do I stay focused in the day-to-day and I don't even like look out and imagine the power and beauty of what I'm part of, right? But I can't always live in La La Land because I got all these damn emails and felt like it's not pretty. Like the view, what we're working towards is so pretty, and then the day in and day out work is so just like roots we're tripping over and bugs, dirt.
It's a great analogy, though. I mean, I know the crowd is with you on this one, Glennon.
So listen, Tiffany, I have I think you're probably waiting for me to tell you how to do that. I don't know.
Yeah,
All I know
that's
is
my
it's
next
a
question. How do we do that?
of looking down and up and down and up, and remembering how beautiful the work is we're doing, but also not tripping.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great analogy. In a lot of ways, that's kind of how life is too.
Yes.
Sometimes when you're just so focused. As I mentioned, we had tons of questions that came in, and if you'll indulge me on this one, we had a lot of people ask this next question, and so I'll just ask it as it was posed. So, Glennon, what do you feel like is the most important piece of advice you have ever received in your entire life? The one piece of advice.
Well, everyone's gonna hate this one but for me, it was Glennon, get sober. Right? And I think I can make that applicable to everybody without taking away your wine. So don't get scared, everybody. I'm not going to take away any of your survival strategies, but I do think that for me, I mean, I was a pretty extreme alcoholic and food addict, so I was never going to do anything. I was never going to live any life that was close to as beautiful as what I was supposed to unless I got healthy from that. But I also do think that there's a challenge for everybody, which is that we have all of these things that we do to take the edge off, right? And what I have noticed is that people who try to live into that edge and don't constantly take the edge off are the ones who eventually find their truest life, because the discomfort and the misery that we are trying to numb is trying to tell us something, right? Like, I have nothing left, Tiffany. Like, I just got it all taken away from me, right? All of the numbing techniques, which means that I have to actually address the small,
it's right in your face then,
or medium miseries that I'm being faced with, right? Like, life can provide discomfort that is a message. It's like, not this way, not this. You're not meant to be miserable, not this. And so what I see happen so much in extreme ways and little ways is like, if every single night you're just taking the edge off, you're numbing out the message from the universe that this thing isn't true and beautiful enough for you. And that's how I think people end up in good enough lives forever. It's like the thing they think is helping them survive is what's keeping them from.
Yeah, almost like masking what they really need to address to get to their best life.
Yeah, what if the edge is life? Right?
Yeah, I love it. And it kind of leads me into, I know we could be here all day. It leads me into my final question. And this is a big one. So I know I'm posing a lot of questions asking for the one message or the one piece of advice. But I'll ask you this one. You know, we have dozens of thousands of attendees, maybe hundreds of thousands. And want to ask, what is the one message or thought you want these thousands of social good professionals to walk away with today? And if you'd like to also, what is your challenge to them?
I just have a feeling that this crowd in particular doesn't need any more challenges. I have plenty of groups that I challenge. Yeah. I think for this one, they're probably good on challenge.
Yeah.
Tiffany, is that right? Okay. So maybe we go for comfort instead of challenge.
Let's go that path, that.
I mean, I'll tell you, when I was getting sober 20 years ago, I was teaching, I was a third grade teacher. And I was so feeling it all for the first time. It's just like you know, when people are frostbit and then everything comes back to
tingly.
Ooh, ooh. And I used to have this pilgrimage that I would take each day past my friend Josie's classroom, because she had this sign in her classroom for her second graders. I was a third grade teacher, that said, "We can do hard things." That's where this whole thing came from. And there's something about that simple, ridiculous sentence, "We can do hard things." That's what I named the podcast. That has escorted me through every single day since then for 20 years, which is there's some kind of accountability in it. It's not like life is hard, so screw it.
Yeah, or give it up. Yeah, it's saying face it. You can do this.
You can do hard things, but then there's also and also it's this suggestion that it's hard because you're doing it right. It's hard because you chose hard. Well done. Plenty of people don't. It's hard because you chose wisely, right? And then there's the we, which is every time somebody comes to me and says, Glennon, I have your saying I can do hard things on my wall. I'm like, oh, no, I did not say that.
Strike the eye.
No, yeah. Look at me right now. Do I look like I'm doing hard things? Like, no. What's beautiful about this call and these people is all the things that each of you is experiencing right now. It's the aloneness of being human and being engaged in world-changing work. It's so alone and hard, but it's this aloneness that is shared in this we. Every single person who's on this call is as alone as you are together, right? That is how I survive family, work, sobriety, parenthood, all of these extremely lonely experiences are also being experienced by every other brave soul on the earth at the exact same time. So I think that's what I leave everybody with, is just that idea that, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's supposed to be hard. We chose the hard because we knew that that was the best life. And we're in it together.
I love that. Yeah, that powerful message. And we can do hard things, as you mentioned the name of the podcast. So join the pod squad, everyone. Glennon, I can't thank you enough. This has been a thrill being able to have you join us on the BBCon main stage. I speak on behalf of the many thousands joining just to say thank you for sharing your insight, your words of wisdom, your inspiration, and opening up. So thank you so much.
What a treat. Thank you, and everybody, just thank you. Thank you for Joan of Arcing. I think that's what we're going to call it. Joan of Arcing.
That's a
the
verb.
world.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for being the healers. It's not easy, but the world stands grateful. Thank you. Take care of yourselves.
Yes. So thank you again, Glennon. And with that, I'm going to send it back